Hi everyone, this is Dr. Giobbi, and we're looking now at group counseling, which will be an overview of Chapter 18 in your textbook. Group therapy really became popular in the 1970s and 80s, and I would say that the two types of group therapy that really drove um, the progression and towards greater availability and prevalence of group therapy would be Gestalt encounter groups and the Gestalt group therapy and the humanistic encounter groups. So Gestalt therapy largely used group therapy where Fritz Perls would do therapy session in front of an entire group, and different group members would come up to the hot seat in the front of the group or in the middle of the group and would conduct therapy with group members individually. In the encounter group, Carl Rogers encounter groups, the group therapy took place mostly as participation between members of the group. So group therapy really caught on in the 70s and the 80s. 60s and 70s with encounter groups with Carl Rogers, humanistic encounter groups, and then in the 70s and 80s, really Gestalt groups became very popular. Still are popular today. So when we're looking at this chapter on group counseling with children, really a big portion of this chapter is kind of like a first-time introduction to group counseling, and the authors go over many of the basics of group counseling. Now, I want to emphasize to you that you'll take a course specifically in group counseling, Introduction to Group Counseling, and that will go over all of this information that is presented to you in this chapter, but in depth. Each topic would be probably a week's worth of work in an intro to group counseling. So we're just going to go over this and give you an idea of what this is all about so you can have a better understanding. The idea of a group setting as being a natural laboratory is by Corey and Corey. This is Gerald Corey and his wife, who write the classic texts for counseling methods, Introduction to Counseling, and also Introduction to Group Counseling. Corey and Corey books are really, I think, the best out there. And then, of course, you can get more specific styles of groups. Irvin Yalom, in his existential psychology, he wrote a classic text on group therapy. Of course, Carl Rogers wrote a classic text on group therapy. So you'll find many texts that really go into depth. I would start out, reading this chapter, and then taking a course or reading a textbook on the various forms of group Introduction to Group Therapy, and then go into these specific books by Yalom and Rogers and others. In a group setting with adults, with people, with adults or with children, pre-people, we have a dynamic that takes place. There's something very interesting that happens when people are aware that others are encountering and going through the same difficulties they are. There's something cathartic, something therapeutic about just being in a group with others who are dealing with your same issues or similar issues. So this is an opportunity to have those sorts of supporting bonds that take place between group members. Having to deal with people who have different opinions, different beliefs, different focus, different orientations in life, focus in life. This is also a very big part of groups, learning how to act with one another, being awareness of building empathy and building awareness of others. This is also a place where new ideas can be explored safely with not, I want to say without judgment, but without malicious judgment. And this is, of course, the uh, the role of the group leader is to keep the group healthful, focused, uh, keep them keep the group, especially with children, from uh, spinning off into something chaotic, something unhealthful. And I guess a good example would be if you see today a group online, it's a group message boards, and there's usually a moderator who has to step in and make sure everybody's behaving in a healthful way. And that's also what a group counselor does. A group counselor um, makes sure that the group stays on focus and healthful and beneficial. Sometimes that means being like a moderator. That means telling someone they have to change something or they won't be invited back to the group. It could mean encouraging certain members to be more active in the group, others to exercise some sort of self restraint or self control in a group. The counselor really is counseling human relationships. So there's different types of groups. We have psychoeducational groups. These are great for children when there's something you want to teach a child, and their age group they learn together. So you might have a group of six members, six or five or six members, and the goal is to teach maybe a social skill or a study skill or practice skill or something like this. Some sort of psychoeducational, emotional intelligence, maybe transactional analysis, or any of these parenting, how to handle parents. So psychoeducational group. This is looking at teaching a group of children about uh, emotional well-being or life philosophy, things like this, something oriented towards the psyche. A counseling group is usually conducted when dealing with adjustment issues, people having problems fitting in or doing something, cooperating with the group, etc. So this isn't pathology. This isn't psychosis or depression or anxiety or things like this. This is more adjustment problems. When you get into group therapy, this is really looking at clinically based issues like you might have a eating disorder group or an anxiety disorder group, panic disorder group, or depression group. And this is when dealing specifically with uh, diagnoses. So as we look at the methods of focus, I'm sorry, the focus of the groups, we can look that we have study skills can be a focus, listening skills, overcoming test anxieties. These would be remedial group focuses, focusing on skills that will be needed at some point in their functioning in everyday life. Preventive, so problem solving focus, anger management, or handling stress. And then you have support groups, which is personal problems, parental divorce, bad habits, going to a new school. These are all support group ideas. We can also have developmental group focus, so who am I, identity, relationships. This personal identity is a great one for adolescents. This stage of Erickson, coming to terms with the question, who am I? And young people discussing identity and how they're coming to terms with working through to discover their sense of self. You have emotional and behavioral development, academic achievement, career planning. These are all developmental issues, uh, including problem-centered stuff, relationships and conflicts with authority figures and dating and sexual matters, balancing commitments, topic-specific stuff. You can have a group on grief and loss. You can have a group, a teen parenting group, a suicide and separation, or a suicide group, or a divorce and separation group. So these are, you have to clearly define what the group focus is. And when you advertise for the group, that's, you maybe put it up online that there's going to be a support group or a psychoeducational, but you clearly describe what's going on in that group. And people who contact you, you have to screen them to know if they're appropriate for the group. You also want to know ahead of time how many people you're allowing in that group. So you don't want too many people in the group. You want to know if it's an open group or a closed group. So an open group, members can come and go, drop in kind of each week. With a closed group, you decide on a set number of members of that group who start with session one and end at the last session, and they're expected to be at every session together. That's a closed group. You also have forms that you, disclosure forms that you fill out before, that everyone signs before entering the group. It talks about confidentiality and what exactly the group is about and what they should expect, etc. Because you are charging people for this, so you have to be upfront that everything's clear and in writing from the beginning what they're expecting. Otherwise, at the halfway through, at the end of the group, you could have a problem. You're often dealing with adults who have life management skill issues, so you can expect that there's going to be some drama. So you have to really be clear and set boundaries up front, being completely clear of what is to be expected. And then when the person says you're not meeting my expectations, you say you have to reread that contract that you signed in the beginning. We clearly state what the objectives of the group are, and their signatures on it. So it's kind of hard to argue with one signature. You will encounter it, though. Remember, you're not only dealing with human beings, which is complicated, but you're dealing with human beings that have difficulty constructively managing their lives in many cases. So, you'd have to be prepared for that as a counselor, as a therapist, psychologist, whatever it is that you're going to call yourself. In the group, going through how a group opens up, you have this initial stage, which is, you notice this in the first day of class, ice breaking and getting acquainted. If you're in a small classroom, people get to know each other, and you come to know what people are expecting from the group, and you give an outline to the group of them knowing what they can expect from you over the next, say, 15 weeks. And that might last for a session or two. And then you go into this transitional stage, and this is where you enter into the dynamics of the group. And This is when there can be challenges and resistance from group members. The group leader has to be very skilled at handling challenges. There will be group members who will seek to maybe show off to the other group members and show up the counselor and test their leadership skills, and you have to be prepared for that. And bring that to the attention of the group therapy when it happens. There's also going to be increased anxiety in the members of the group because, of course, they're encountering emotional aspects of their lives. They're coming into contact with this, and that's vulnerable to do in front of others, especially in front of yourself. And then you have the working stage. This is when members focus on the goals and the concerns. They're past most of this, although it will come back here and there, most of this challenging of the leader or emotional reactions to each other. Mostly people at this point are working on goals and practicing new behaviors. The textbook outlines some very interesting thing that happened in the first session. You clarify the ground rules, be very clear, build trust and cohesiveness between members, say discussing confidentiality, and discuss active listening to each other. So this is the idea that we focus on the group, and when whomever is speaking at one time, we give our full attention to them, and whatever is discussed in the group stays in the group. You don't go out and discuss other people's business in the communities. In the remaining sessions of the group, you always summarize the previous group meeting. So here it says summary of the initial meeting. But what you would do is at the beginning of the next group, you'd say, okay, last time we did this and so did this, and this is what we discussed, and this is what we did for our homework. Is there any business that we need to discuss, any unfinished business from last week's session? That's the kind of way you would open up a group typically. You keep a therapeutic atmosphere. That means it can be fun, it can be pleasant, but you're not hanging out together. It's not a fun session amongst friends. You're there to do work, and you remain the professional, not a buddy, which is very important to be aware of that. You continue to address any problems or concerns that come up, and as again, you're dealing with people who have some stability issues and some issues in having relationships with people, so there are going to be complications that you'll have to address. And you also want to set the goals and talk about with each group member in front of each other how they're accomplishing the goals that they've set out to accomplish, to evaluate what's going on in the group. Now, of course, different age groups will have different concerns. When you're counseling children in the first 6 years of life, this is going to be a lot to do with having to address social skills and improve racial relationships. So coming to terms with people who are different than ourselves, and also shaping positive attitudes towards things like school. Their first social interaction is going to be school, out of the house. When you get into pre-adolescence, you're going to be dealing with family issues and peer pressure, anger management. And then as individuals get older, you're going to be an adolescent, you're dealing with things like life choices, stress and aggression, eating disorders, self-esteem, body awareness, self-concept, all these things, if you go down those Erikson conflicts, the psychosocial conflicts, you're going to be very aware of how, of what a group might be addressing at different ages. This is a great guideline for doing this. So let's say you have a closed group, 15 sessions with 6 members in the group. as you're going to, you have the different stages of the group, and as you get to session 13, 14, and then finally 15, you'll begin winding down the group, and you want to have closure within the group. You can't just suddenly stop the group and say, okay, thanks for coming. It has to wind down because there's been a deep emotional sharing and bonds and conflicts and resolutions. Difficult things have been gone through together, and that's going to create emotional attachments. So you have to wind the group down. So in the last, you clearly state, okay, we're now in session 13, and we're going to begin winding down and assessing how things what has taken place over the past 13 weeks as we enter into our concluding 2 sessions together. And you want to talk about things like, what did they set out to accomplish, and how did each individual respond to that, to those goals, and who and what has changed within the group as individuals and the group as a whole. How effective was what did the group leader have to offer? Were they effective in manifesting? And what were things that could have been better or changed that could have been more beneficial for facilitating the group? Things of this nature. And you assess the leader's effectiveness by answers to some of the questions, and come to terms with what exactly is those 3 questions that we were looking at, and understand exactly what has happened in this group. And you also look at this with individuals who are in there, who have going around with each individual and the group, discussing each person who participated in the group, where they started, where they went, and where they are now. And this is all a place of kind of tying up loose ends. Of course, for the group leader, you're going to go home and you're going to do a lot of self-reflection, have conversations with colleagues. My feeling is that the best thing you can do for yourself is to read. People who read are at a great advantage in life. And the more you read, the more you read books on counseling, you're keeping yourself in check. You can also do this. Maybe you have your own support group with other therapists, where you and other therapists who are working with their own groups meet as a group, excuse me, and come to terms with difficulties and obstacles, and helping each other to become better group leaders, better therapists, and better counselors. So I'm going to go here now to the end of this. The group members grow when they make commitments to teach others, to improve their behavior, when they accomplish specific personal goals, and we take appropriate skills in the group. They accept responsibility for themselves and for the growth of others. Finding their place in a group and helping one another is a rewarding accomplishment for children, skills that will improve their lives at school, at home. Group work is very powerful, not only for children, but for adolescents and for adults as well. And you may even consider that some therapists only do group therapy. They find it so effective. So with that, we are going to conclude not only this lecture, but the course. And I hope that this has been very interesting and useful information to you. And I hope you realize that each one of these chapters, including group therapy, has its own undergraduate course that you can take. If the course isn't offered in our department, you can find it in another school or online, or go on Cengage or some other publisher's website and find a good textbook and read it yourself. Put together a study group with your classmates. If you want to get experience doing things like group therapy, Nothing's stopping you from starting an informal group now of your colleagues, a study group, something that you can put into practice the skills that you're studying to learn. Thanks for listening.